Carmine gave me the nod.
On Johnny?
That one's a slippery fuck, huh? Him and those big fish lips of his.
Throughout The Sopranos, we are treated to numerous bosses running their respected families. As in the Soprano family, we see Jackie Aprile Sr. run the family in the beginning stages of the series. Uncle Jr. then takes over briefly before getting indicted and rubbing members of the Soprano crew the wrong way. But then we see Tony as the family's boss for a majority of the series. After Tony gets suddenly shot by Uncle Jr. in the season 6 pilot episode, we actually see Silvio become acting boss of the family while Tony is in his coma. The Lupertazzis also have their fair share of bosses running the family throughout the series. For a majority of the series, Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is the family's boss up until his sudden death from a stroke. We then watch a power struggle between his accomplice, John Sacramone, and Carmine's son, Little Carmine, to even old school members who did time in jail like Phil Leotardo, Doc Santoro, and Butchie all become boss towards the end of the series. But throughout the series, there's one boss that is the boss of all bosses, as he represents the traditional ethics, codes, and salutes the oath of the Mafia. And while Tony Soprano is a great boss throughout the series, he's viewed in a weaker manner thanks to the discovery of him visiting Dr. Melfi to control his chronic panic attacks and depression. As the old school Mafia boss that is the boss of all bosses throughout The Sopranos is none other than Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. Before we get started, be sure to click subscribe and click the bell to get notifications on all upcoming Sopranos content. And be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. As discussed in my previous video, Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is the first boss of the Lupertazzis that we see during The Sopranos. His father, Giovanni, became boss thanks to Charles Lucky Luciano, who appointed the family. Carmine became boss of the Lupertazzis after the death of his father from apparent lung cancer. During his reign as boss of the family, Carmine invented point shaving, a technique where no one would beat the spread by having a handful of basketball players in on a payroll scheme to earn weekly payouts from the Mafia. For a portion of Carmine being boss, his underboss was John Sacramone, as we learned thanks through Tony that Carmine has been boss of the family for over 30 years now. And it's ultimately this relationship that he had with Sacramone that would have likely caused his demise or resulted in Lupertazzi getting clipped had he not suffered a sudden stroke. This is all due in part to the conflict that was the joke about Ginny Sacramone, John's wife, that Ralph supposedly said during a dinner. As we all know the story and joke by now, and how Sacramone wanted Ralph to get clipped. However, Lupertazzi wouldn't approve of Ralph getting clipped due to his immense earning that he provided for both families with the Esplanade construction project, as this dispute was the beginning of John's hatred towards the boss of the family. Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is an old-school, self-centered, tough mobster, as throughout the series, Carmine can often be seen keeping a low profile in the Averna social club that is based in Brooklyn. Despite Carmine's business-minded attitude, he was a ruthless mob boss. In many ways, Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is very similar to that of real-life Mafia boss Big Paul Castellano, as both mobsters shared similar traits, and throughout their tenure as boss, the two were very business-minded, opportunistic, constantly kept a low profile, focused on the traditional roots of the Mafia, and ordered hits whenever they felt it was needed. And when it came to money, there was no stopping Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. Thanks to the help of Paulie Walnuts being a mole for New York, with John Sacramone using Paulie for information, Carmine ultimately found out about the HUD scam that Tony was doing with Ralph, thanks to the help of Brian Camerata, Carm's cousin. And with this, we watched Carmine interrogate Tony's appraiser that was giving away phony appraisals on houses that were worthless, as he sent Joey to go beat up Tony's appraiser, causing a little war between the two families. During the 1980s, Carmine was arrested for labor racketeering, along with his longtime loyal consigliere, Angelo Gareppe. And due to Carmine's wealth, thanks to construction, he was able to avoid a lengthy jail sentence, unlike Gareppe and other members like Phil Leotardo and Doc Santoro. And it was ultimately money that was the reason why Carmine was almost clipped by John. as Carmine had major income from construction and John didn't. And the joke about Ginny only added salt to the wound for Carmine and made matters worse when he didn't support his underboss's rights and wishes about his wife, as Carmine sided with Ralph instead of John. During his reign as boss, the Lupertazzis quickly became the wealthiest mafia family and the most powerful mafia family out of all the 5 families in New York. While this was mainly from construction, this was also because Carmine decided to keep close ties to the Sopranos in New Jersey, despite their family being smaller, weaker, and less powerful, and the fact that Carmine viewed them as a glorified crew.
Family? I told you, they're a glorified crew.
Whatever they are, Carmine, the Sopranos bring in a lot of cash. I've been close with Tony for a lot of years.
Throughout The Sopranos, there were plenty of heated moments between the two families, as we saw the potential hits that Carmine wanted to take out on his underboss John, and vice versa with John wanting to whack Carmine, as the two mobsters never knew how close they were to getting whacked, with the two of them calling off the hits in the last possible moments. As in these scenarios, Tony is the middleman in both of these situations, something that John was throughout the series for the Lupertazzis. As during the conflict between John and Ralph, Carmine and everyone else involved knew how serious the situation was and how much worse the situation could get. Being the low-profile mob boss that he was, Carmine knew the only way to settle the situation was to have John clipped, as Carmine knew no sit-down or whacking of Ralph could ever fix this situation due to John's anger towards Cifaretto and the joke he made about his wife. As one morning, Carmine surprisingly calls Tony to inform him about the possible whacking of John.
I don't want that apple cart upset.
Yeah, then somebody should do something about it.
I appreciate your thoughts.
You saying what I think you're saying?
I didn't say nothing.
This scene is so tense and realistic, as it showcases how ruthless Carmine was. We then see a similar scene later in the series with John secretly meeting with Tony and plotting to have Carmine whacked despite John being Carmine's underboss. This scene too is so realistic because it showcased how mobsters would have hits organized. As we all know, the world of the Mafia is full of greed, and mobsters would eventually go behind one another's back to have them killed over money and hierarchy and power. As both the supposed hits on Lupertazzi and Sacramone were likely reminiscent of John Gotti taking out Castellano. Out of all the bosses that we see in the series, either Sacramone or Lupertazzi were the wealthiest. Carmine essentially bought his way out of going to jail by avoiding labor racketeering charges. He had ties to the Esplanade, the HUD scams thanks to Paulie flapping his gums, and countless other deals that he had established with the Sopranos made Carmine the wealthiest boss of all time. He didn't develop a severe gambling problem like Tony did that we saw towards the end of season 6, or splurge on big houses and fancy cars like John Sacramone did. Carmine knew how to maintain a functional family within the Mafia, knew when to take matters into his own hands, and knew when to keep a low profile. While grooming an imbecile of a son in little Carmine, Carmine Sr. will likely be remembered throughout the Mafia and throughout The Sopranos as a respected and financially successful boss. While he wasn't well liked by everyone, specifically John Sacramone, he provided members of both The Sopranos and Lupertazzis with millions of dollars and knew when individuals had to go. As in my opinion, Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. will always be the boss of all bosses throughout The Sopranos. What are your thoughts about Carmine Lupertazzi Sr.? Let me know down in the comment section below. For more Sopranos content, keep it locked here, right here on this channel.